Great. Hey guys, my name is Brian Gable. I'm the Director of Assessment and Program Evaluation at Clover Park School District. I'm also a WERA board member, proud WERA board member, and I'm the organizer of the WERA Remote Learning Series. Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate you being here. If everybody can see my screen, I'll talk a little bit about WERA. WERA has been recognized as a forum for educators and scholars, building district leaders. It's been recognized as a forum for teachers, building and district leaders and scholars with a shared passion for applying the lessons learned through educational research. For 35 years, we have partnered with OSPI to host an annual conference to share cutting-edge studies, foster dialogue, and build community. This year, our challenge is great. It is to continue this service for you with online programming until we are confident that it is safe to return to the in-person professional development that we all know and love, the WERA annual conference. The WERA board is hard at work to address these challenges for the start of the 2021 membership year in September, and we're going to reach out to you with information next month. Please consider supporting WERA with your membership and participation if you enjoy events like these. Now, I'm going to plug, this is a bit of a plug here for the Remote Learning Panel Series, Part 3. You guys are here to learn about WaKIDS, but next week, on Tuesday, August 18th, we're going to talk about identifying English language learners in the virtual classroom. We have some great guests lined up. We have many more that may join the panel. If you're interested in attending, look for an email in your inbox by this weekend. Register for it, it's free. We promise we won't spam you. Forward the registration email to your bilingual and education friends. If you're interested in joining or creating a panel, you can email me if you have a good idea. For example, how to identify HICAP children. That's one of the things that we're going to probably talk about in a later panel. There are lots of benefits of being a part of WERA. You'll get invites to future webinars and events, and you can download executive summaries of all the things that we've covered. All right. Now, without further ado, I want to introduce our featured panelists. We have Karma Hugo and Yoona Park from OSPI, Whitney White from the Puget Sound Educational Service District. You guys, these are household names for some of us here on the west side. And then we have Jessica Wallace, kindergarten teacher from Birchwood Elementary in Bellingham Public Schools. My own, Lindsay Callahan from the Clover Park School District at Evergreen Elementary. Laurie Sjolund from the Sumner-Bonney Lake School District, and Alyssa Hayes, kindergarten teacher at Cedar River Elementary from Tahoma School District. A little bit of etiquette before we move on. Everyone, if you would now please mute your mic, and please turn off your camera so that you only see the panelists that are on here. If you have questions during the session, feel free to type them in the chat box. We're going to be monitoring the chat box, and we'll get to those questions during the last 20 minutes of this presentation. Without further ado, I hand this over to WERA President Brian Rick.
Welcome, everyone. Sorry about that delay. This is an amazing turnout. We've got a fantastic topic here of great interest, and I think that we're right now at about 300 participants, and I'll continue to keep the door open and be letting people in. This is a really tough time to do all the things that we're doing, and so pleased that we've got this panel of experts to help us through. So with that, I think we're ready to go. I think we let Karma take the road and show us how to do this. Karma, would you like to share your screen?
Yes, I would. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm going to just take a moment here and put up the slides that I have to share with you. Okay. Sorry, there's some Zoom things covering over my view, so I'm having a little trouble finding what I need to find without moving around, but here we go. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karma Hugo. I'm the Director of Early Learning at OSPI, and I'm so pleased to be here with you today. I'd like to take a moment and share with you that we have additional new staff in our office at OSPI. I'm pleased to introduce Yoona Park, who is our new WaKIDS assessment specialist, and she is joining me here today for this presentation. So Yoona, would you mind unmuting and just saying hello to everyone?
Hi everybody, my name is Yoona Park, and like Karma said, I'm the new WaKIDS assessment specialist at OSPI. I am super excited to be here and work along with you throughout the year. Feel free to reach out. I'll try to offer as much as help possible. See you later.
Thank you, Yoona. Yoona is spending a lot of her time right now supporting district assessment coordinators and their designees in the student input process into the My Teaching Strategies assessment platform. Many of you may know Amber Havens, who is the WaKIDS coordinator for OSPI for a number of years. Amber has departed OSPI as of June, so we're very pleased that Yoona has stepped up and is in the role that she's in. So as you all know, WaKIDS is continuing this year as usual, but under remote circumstances. So I'm sure many of you are here just to really try to understand how that's possible. But first, before I go into that, I just would like to first acknowledge how hard that everyone worked this past spring and continues to work into the fall, standing up remote learning and imagining what that might be like. I'm sure, like me, that you have been just filled with apprehension and concern for what that experience will be like, all of the many unknowns, particularly unknowns around how our kindergarten students and very young children will fare in a remote learning situation and how best we can support them during this time. Please know that the decision to conduct WaKIDS is intended as a support to families and teachers and not as a burden. I know that many folks are feeling the sense of concern about how it will be conducted during this time, but I hope that after today, you will see that WaKIDS is a tool to help launch remote learning, and you'll understand the opportunities and flexibilities to use it this year. So I'm going to just start off with the first of the three components of WaKIDS. As we know, WaKIDS is a kindergarten transition process that includes an assessment component, but really begins with a family connection component. These meetings take place at the beginning of the school year, and there are some considerations that we want as we go into learning. So always, of course, we want to prioritize building relationships at the start of the school year, but this will, of course, be so much more important this year. This family connection will be an opportunity to really establish initially the ongoing communication that families and teachers may have together over the course of the year. Families are always nervous about beginning kindergarten. It's a huge step in a family's journey as they enter the K-12 system, often for the very first time. So as some of our WERA representatives were sharing, that they have students entering kindergarten this year themselves. So this is maybe for folks quite personal, the experience of beginning kindergarten remotely as a family. So we really see that WaKIDS is a way that can be very reassuring for families and help them really understand what to expect for the year. So we offer a potential script that is included in some of the resources that we'll be sharing with you later, but I think it sums up nicely really why we are moving forward with WaKIDS this year. So this is, again, intended to be something someone would share with a family about why we're doing WaKIDS. But during WaKIDS, we will collaborate to identify learning goals for your child. We will work together to determine the best ways we can communicate about your child's current strengths and needs, including through conversations, games, and learning activities that might take place together or at various times of the day during normal family routines. And of course, nobody knows their child better than families, parents themselves. So we know that there are many concerns and potential issues of equity as we think about not just WaKIDS, but remote learning in general. I think also there is a question of equity when it comes to assuming that perhaps just because families may be working or don't have access to technology, that they don't want these things, that they are not interested or will make time for identifying goals and helping establish understanding of where their children are in their current development and wanting to work together with teachers to make that happen. So it really is incumbent on us to move past those issues of equity and figure out really how we can work with each and every family, not just in kindergarten, but across all of our grades. So I'm thinking about the family connection and some newer conversations that teachers and families will be having as we step into remote assessment, remote learning. It will be important to understand what the family routine will be and whether the parents or guardians will be working at home or away from the home, who will be the child's primary caregiver during the school day, discussing prior early learning experiences, including settings that they may have been in preschool or cared for by a relative or friend, childcare program, wondering and finding out whether the family or the care provider will have access to Wi-Fi, computers, or other devices, what materials are needed to assist in remote learning, and how families will prefer to receive those materials for learning. So the family connection can be an opportunity as you're taking time to get to know families, what sorts of things they enjoy doing together, what specific concerns that they may have for their child, hopes that they may have for their child, really understanding what the context of the remote learning experience will be to situate the learning as the year rolls on. So early learning collaboration is another critical component of WaKIDS and the transition to kindergarten. Typically, this piece of WaKIDS has been focused on the transition and smoothing the transition for children that might have been in a preschool setting into kindergarten. And this is still important, but really thinking about what's different about this year, it's important to realize that schools have an important role to play in settings that children may be in outside of the home. So we know that depending on the schedule that districts choose, and more are opting for remote learning, that there will be many working families with school-age children who potentially will be in some form of care outside of school. Childcare capacity to serve children who would ordinarily be in school is really different all around the state. Childcare providers have been affected by the pandemic, and that has impacted how many children they can serve. It has impacted the kinds of practices they've had to implement to meet Department of Health guidelines, and they may not have the capacity to meet the demand that will occur as families may attempt to go back to work while their children are in remote learning. So another factor is childcare providers may be caring for a wider span of ages as they accommodate children that wouldn't ordinarily be in their care during school, which is going to have some additional impacts for them. Just to go into a little more detail about some early learning collaboration considerations and things that schools and teachers may do, recognizing that children may be in childcare, would be to identify an early learning contact in the district to serve as a point person between community and district-based early learning programs, to seek and invite community-based early learning organizations to provide input on back-to-school planning, especially considering that it will have such a direct impact on their programs, their businesses. Include childcare providers in family-facing communications where appropriate. So for instance, if the district is sending regular updates to families about scheduling considerations, that those would also go to childcare providers, particularly where those changes in schedule and practice will directly, again, relate to the services they may be providing families, ideally to allow them time to make adjustments to support their families as needed. Some things that teachers may do specifically is to find out which children are in childcare during the day, to develop release forms and other documents that would allow the teacher to speak directly to the childcare provider as needed. Thinking about what the wider school and district may do is enabling access between schools and childcare programs to virtual learning platforms, logins, and of course, where necessary, create data share agreements. In addition, providing technology supports for the students in care who would potentially need to access continuous learning opportunities or synchronous learning opportunities, Wi-Fi, hotspots, other district devices, along with training and technical assistance for those childcare providers, again, who are trying to support student learning during care time in their facilities. Districts should note that they should consult with their district legal counsel for recommendations around options for partnering to make sure that it doesn't constitute a gift of public funds. And then within established district agreements and protocols, consider creative ways that district technology support staff may assist childcare providers with their online learning platforms and other technology. Here, I just want to pause and say, as with families, schools and teachers will really need to be sensitive about placing further burden on childcare providers and recognize that they may not have the capacity to support multiple children, multiple grade levels, multiple different demands or schedules for things like synchronous learning. And so really, it needs to be a conversation at the local level with particular childcare providers to see what would be supportive of them. And if they are unable to support and don't have the capacity, then just with families, we just need to be thinking creatively about how to continue to support students who may be in care during the day. So in thinking about sort of more, why is it that we're doing WaKIDS? This is a graph that depicts the range of maturation as children move from birth. So along the bottom line there, starting at 0 all the way through age 8. And each of these trajectories represents a trajectory of growth. You see along the bottom, there's a slow to mature trajectory, a normative maturation trajectory, and an early maturation trajectory. So this graph is ultimately representing that wide range of growth and development that we recognize children follow as they progress from birth through age 8 and up past age 8. Some people might be considered late bloomers, early walkers, late to speak, that there's a huge range that we recognize is typical and represents developmental differences across children. What this graph is pointing to here and really drawing attention to is that kindergarten represents the time in public schools when we see the largest difference in maturational differences between children. So as children enter kindergarten, there is a wide range of skills and abilities they bring, and that wide range is typical and should be expected. We wouldn't believe that every child will be in the same place in every area at the beginning of kindergarten. In fact, it's actually the widest range of any other grade level. And this is important as we look and see what our WaKIDS data is really showing us the same thing, that not only is there a wide range of typical development, but there are other things that may occur in a child and family's life that could impact and create even wider differences. Trauma, medical issues that a child may have early on, things that would create even wider gaps between children. So what I'm showing now is the fall 2019 WaKIDS data. This is each one of these bars corresponds to one of the areas of development that we assess as part of WaKIDS: cognitive, language, literacy, math, physical, and social emotional development. Many of the teachers here will recognize what these colors represent, but each of these colors represents a specific age range where we typically see particular skills exhibited, or that range of typical skills that are considered widely expected for a particular child. So what we're seeing here is actually the cohort of entering kindergartners and the way that the range of skills fell out across each of these areas. So just to give a specific example here, let's look at the very bottom of these rows. So social emotional shows the range of skills that children entered kindergarten with. If we look at the dotted line is really showing us sort of that normative trajectory where we would see sort of most children exhibiting skills, recognizing that, again, there is a range that would be considered typical. Here we are seeing in the social emotional band that about 25% of incoming kindergartners in the fall of 2019 entered with the social emotional skills that we would typically expect of children 3 or younger. And you can see up all of these areas, just that span of the skills that children brought when they entered kindergarten. For me, this is one of the most important data displays that we have for WaKIDS, not the percentage of children that are ready or not ready, but really what are the skills that they are bringing, and to recognize that it runs the gamut. There's a huge range that we would typically expect, and then there's a wider range where there are other variables that may impact development. So knowing this and thinking about going into the school year and realizing that part of the opportunity with WaKIDS is to really find where each child is in their development, to help begin instruction, to begin those conversations with families about where their child is presently in their development, and to find that next developmental step. So again, kindergarten teachers will be familiar with this. This is an example of one of the developmental progressions that we use as part of WaKIDS. This particular objective comes from the area of social emotional development. Again, we see the colored bands across the bottom corresponding to the ages we would typically expect certain behaviors or characteristics. And the purple band where the arrow is pointing is that kindergarten band. So teachers, as they are assessing, the task that they have with WaKIDS is to find out where along this continuum on all of the objectives associated with WaKIDS, where each child is in their development. The beauty, I believe, of the tool that we have selected for WaKIDS is that it really isn't just summative assessment. We aren't just asking teachers to report, here's where the child is, but we're really hoping that teachers are looking at that next step. What is the next place on the continuum? If this is where the child is now, where are they headed? This is particularly important, again, knowing that children are going to be in many different stages of development. I fear that I might be going over time, so I'm going to go quickly through what everybody's really probably here to hear about, and that is, how will we conduct this assessment remotely? So first, we want to prioritize building relationships, making sure that families are brought slowly into conversations about their children's development, that we're focusing on this assessment tool to the extent that it can help inform those instructional next steps. We are inviting families to participate in the process of collecting evidence about their child's learning, being cautious and flexible, not to pressure them or suggest that they are expected to contribute, knowing that many families will want to if we can flexibly think about how they can do that. And one way is to work with families to identify opportunities to observe skills as they occur during regular daily routines with typical household items or typical experiences that children and families may have that you have the opportunity to learn about through the family connection. Encourage teachers and families to develop observations around the child's interest and adjust the pace if needed. So teachers can choose which objectives to assess first. It's their discretion. There's not a particular set of objectives that have to be assessed early on. So really letting the child and the family lead what to observe, and to do that slowly over the full 10-week or possibly 12-week period. And here again, reinforcing this idea that it should take the entire time allotted for WaKIDS. We have learned that some schools attempt to conduct the whole child assessment component of WaKIDS within the first days of school. And I can tell you that is really not how this tool is designed to be conducted. It is meant to be conducted through observation and interactions over a 10 or 12-week period leading up to the assessment deadline. So one of my fears, and probably many who have really wondered how on earth we could conduct WaKIDS, stems from schools and teachers who may be attempting to conduct WaKIDS within a compressed period of time. We are advising teachers to use the not observed option sparingly, but we know that there will be instances where it will not be possible to observe a child for a variety of reasons. Please know that this is an option. Further, we want to clarify that students who have transferred or possibly formally or informally withdrawn from class should be archived in My Teaching Strategies prior to the November 13th deadline. I'm realizing I maybe didn't state that deadline in a prior slide, so it has been extended. Typically, the deadline is October 31st. We have extended it to November 13th. So we want to just make sure that any students who have exited the classroom are no longer in the class at the time of the deadline, November 13th deadline. We want to remind folks that there is an engrossed substitute House bill that requires WaKIDS to replace administration of other assessments being required by districts. And I really encourage districts to recognize how valuable the information that teachers are collecting through WaKIDS is, and to pull back on assessments where possible, so that that is the only assessment that teachers, or one of the only assessments they may be required to do. And also to consider how to not only limit the other assessments, but to use reports such as the report card within teaching strategies, so that the data teachers are collecting can be used immediately with families, and we aren't causing teachers to have to go back and reassess for things like report cards. Just to share some of the resources that we have forthcoming, and by that I'm hoping by the end of this week, very early part of next, is an implementation guide for teachers with many of the things I've shared, as well as some additional resources, goal sheets, choice boards, things that will be made available in 9 of the most common languages spoken in Washington State. Additionally, for those DACs or others who may be responsible for uploading students into the assessment platform, My Teaching Strategies, there is an assessment implementation quick start guide. Hopefully you've received that from Yoona already, but if you haven't, we put the slide here so that you can request a copy. Just a couple more slides here. One of the things I think that will be very helpful for teachers and families are these discussion prompts and example look-fors. So we're providing a resource that has this table that you see here. It has all of the objectives and dimensions for WaKIDS down one side. It has a series of discussion prompts and look-fors. And the final version actually also has corresponding activities, observational activities for each of the items. The idea here is that teachers can engage in conversation with families where you may not have the opportunity to observe a child interacting with peers. You could have a conversation with a family and give them examples of what this might look like, and take on board what that family says and knows about their child to determine your assessment levels. Finally, just a few things that will be available through Teaching Strategies Gold, the assessment platform, are some additional short engaging activities designed specifically to be shared with families and to facilitate remote learning. There's a family mobile app that will introduce some two-way communication between teachers and family members if districts would choose to use it. In order to access these things, it's necessary to have students in your classroom. That may not be possible right away. So if you wish to begin using these activities, we request that you manually add a test student, which will give you access to these items. Instructions for this will be available in, just back to this WaKIDS implementation guide for teachers that will be available on our website in the upcoming days. And that is it for me. Here's the contact information for our office. I apologize for going over time, and I look forward to the panel. Thank you.
Wow, I'm exhausted. Well done, Karma, I appreciate that. We have lots of questions coming in through the chat, and we'll start though with our panelists with some questions that have been generated ahead of time. And we think that a lot of these will hit some of the chat discussion, and there's some specifics that are coming out in there that we'll be monitoring and see if we can address some of those as well. A couple of quick things: the PowerPoint we will make available, as well as the recording. We might need as much as a week to get the recording taken care of and posted and back out to you folks, but it will be available. If you have an urgent need, you can email me and we'll see what we can do in case like you've got your K group that you're meeting with in the start of next week and you're wondering, how can I get the PowerPoint? Send me an email, or if it's about an OSPI resource, definitely use the WaKIDS email and connect up with them, and that will be wonderful. All right, so we have our panelists here, our folks who, it's a great group because we have folks from the trenches, folks who have been in early learning for a long time. And the intent is that we have a good cross-section of people who will be asking the questions that all of our participants would want to know the answers to, as well as giving us a dose of reality and you know, keeping it real. So this is what we're going to try to do for this assessment for WaKIDS. And if some of you are thinking, are you kidding me? Well, this is the time for us to figure that out. So we have Whitney White from Puget Sound ESD, And we have Jessica Wallace from Bellingham Public Schools, Lindsay Callahan from Clover Park, Laurie Sjolund from Sumner-Bonney Lake, and then Alyssa Hayes from Tahoma. Excellent. So our first question to the group is, we wanted to start with the partnering with the parents, because that's pretty critical, obviously, at this time. And we know that there's that strong partnership between the parents and the teachers is going to be critical in assessing the students' progress. So to start off with, what can you help us with what teachers and schools and districts can do to build a strong partnership with the parents, so the parents are fully on board with the role that they might have to play in this administration of the assessment? And we're just going to go with whoever wants to dive in first.
Thanks, Brian. I would say, first of all, it's to build trust, just something we try to do each year, but knowing that this is going to be a different circumstance, that trust building, like Karma said, might take a little bit longer. And so using that full time period until November to ensure that you have a good trusting relationship while you're doing this assessment in partnership is going to be very beneficial.
I'm going to jump in. I'm going to say that also communication is really key. Making sure, even though there is no right now face-to-face, keeping that communication on top, because that parent's going to be asking you questions as well as we're going to be on the same boat with them. But definitely making sure that that communication is it's there, because you want to make sure that you want that parent to know that I want what's best for your child. And, you know, let's work together to make this work for both of us, for your child.
And I think to build off of Lindsay's point, we really need to humanize this experience. And part of that is investigating what our families' preferred methods of communication and making sure we are flexible around that to include them and really empower families in this process.
I would agree with everyone and just add that you know, moving slow so that we can move at the speed of the trust that we have, and keeping in mind that parents are the experts in their child, and honoring that and getting to know what the parents know about the child so that we can then show the expertise that we have in child development to help them get to that next step.
I agree, Laurie. I think that's a system change, right? Like that's a frame change for the parents as well as us as educators, is to elevate the families that they do know their children best. They are the experts. We are going to bring in expertise to support that partnership. But I think it's going to take some time to kind of flip the frame of who will be running the partnership, and it should be the families as they know their child best.
I love my Zoom wait time. Oh,
Can I
Congress
add
has
something?
Yes.
One thing I'm getting a lot of questions about is relying on family report about their child's development. And I think we need to lean into that, because as folks have pointed out, families do know a lot about their children. And sometimes we get it wrong in K-12. I just heard a story this week about a child who had been in kindergarten for a number of weeks without speaking, and the teacher had growing concerns that the child had some limited language capacity, when in reality the child is a total chatterbox at home, right? And it was just not having that opportunity with the family to really check that understanding. So it goes both ways, right? And so there's actually no better way to hone in on a child's true level of development than doing that together as a teacher and a parent. And so knowing also that families will be caring for their children, carrying a lot of this learning at home. Other teachers have expressed that sometimes the behavior at home is different than it is at school. We do act differently in different settings as adults even, but it's okay if what the parent is reporting is behavior specific at home. That's where the learning is occurring. So I think one important way of gaining trust and getting through this assessment is to really lean into what the families have to say about their children, and to trust that as a starting point for beginning instruction.
Thank you for saying that, because that was on my mind as well. And I appreciate that, because they're total different from home to school. And I remember in conferences, parents would be asking, you're talking about my kid, this one right here, right? And I'm like, yeah, your child's great. And they're like, it's a mess. It's a mess at home. But it's good to clarify that, because I'm sure teachers are concerned about that as well, because they need to know, like, do I go with the parent, or do I go based on what I'm seeing right here? So thank you.
Yeah, and I would say it would be both. If you're observing something and the parent is seeing something else, that's a place to have a conversation, because that might make it hard to really know what that instructional next step is if the evidence is conflicting. But that conversation will help smooth that out.
And I think the communication piece, ensuring that we're telling or highlighting that this is a strengths-based observational assessment. Sometimes parents might hear the word assessment or thinking that we're going to assess their child and have some PTSD around it and kind of get nervous. And so having them see that we're going to find what their child is doing really well and build on those skills is going to be crucial as we're communicating with them.
Excellent. I'm going to, we got good questions because it's generating all sorts of chatter. So, and we're seeing, but the real challenges people have. So I think we'll need to circle back to this one and get to some more specifics. But I wanted to relate to another question, some other questions that have been coming into the chat about languages with families. So please help us with what can schools and districts do in their partnership with families for those situations where there are language differences that limit the communication between the school and the family.
I think this is going to sound very intense for some of maybe our players that are here, but we have to have somebody to come and translate. That home connection and that family piece of understanding each other and us understanding what happens in their homes and what their strengths are, it is crucial to have somebody that can come and translate for us. And then I know for me, when I always have a translator, regardless if we speak a different language or if we don't have the common language, that we want to have visuals alongside what we're explaining to them.
Correct. And I know in our district, the school that I'm at, we'll get notification or saying, hey, if you have a child who needs a translator, please notify us, so that communication again is super key. Doesn't matter what, but you want to make sure it's vital. It's super important, because you want to make sure, like, look, I have this person for you, so that you and I are bonding and communicating. Even if you have to, if it's by email, you can Google Translate and just make sure everything's accurate. Or even if you have a friend who can speak two different languages, hey, am I saying this right? Am I typing this correctly? Those are things that can really know for that parent to know, like, wow, this person is taking the time to really stretch out and communicate with me for my child. And I would really appreciate that. And I hope parents are understanding that as well.
I just want to reiterate that this is kindergarten we're talking about. So this is the first experience many families are having with our public schools. They frequently, if they have not engaged with K-12, have no connections with administrators, no prior teachers, maybe no other parents that they're connected to as peers. And this is a moment of feeling very lost. And so it is well worth every investment to prioritize those translation services, obviously to every family, but especially to kindergarten. It will help assure that that family and the experience that they take to through the K-12 system is one of feeling supported and probably one where they will continue to stay engaged. So we can't lose sight that we're talking about kindergarten. Again, this is the first experience that many families will have with our public school system. We have to make that warm and welcome. We have done some focus groups with a variety of families across the spring and summer. Families just want communication. It's okay to say that we're trying, we're still working on it, just to help them see that you are building the resources you need to be able to continue to engage in conversation. But again, what we do in kindergarten in these first few days of the family connection and leading into the year sets a stage for families. And we have to remember that they can't advocate for themselves in a system that they've not experienced before.
And just to build on what Karma was saying, which again is, it's crucial that we are doing everything we can to build these relationships. And this isn't just about family connections conferences. I know in our district, our teachers were so creative in how they reached out to families and developed a very different level of family connections through Closure last year. It took a lot of creativity, outside the box thinking. And when we're thinking about parents and students that already have a language barrier in place, we've got to step even farther outside that box, using something like Language Line or any connection to any staff member that has the common language, and being able to use that tool to break down those barriers. And I think it's also, the focus has to be on that, building the connection and the relationship. But this is also, like I said before, the parent is the expert in that child. And this is an opportunity to to be able to share information about development in all areas. So it just is that developmental trajectory and being able to break down the language barriers, and then find, just like we find child-friendly language to talk about standards and expectations, finding that parent-friendly language to talk about these objectives and the indicators.
And to build on that, Laurie, what a great opportunity to build more trust in you trying to be, and if you go into that experience as a learner trying to learn some of the language that that family speaks. I know for me, when I go into conferences, I always try to learn a greeting or ask them to teach me how to say some of the things that we're explaining about their own child in their own language, and it just further develops that partnership.
All right, we're going to move on to a slight variation on this topic. There's a lot coming through the chat, and we're addressing some of those. So we're running a little long on this section. I think it's okay because we're meeting the needs, and we actually need about 6 hours to get this done. We'll do what we can. This is great. Another relation to this, so one of the questions is, are all the objectives and dimensions from the past year going to be assessed this year? And then in particular, kind of a follow-up to that, what about for the teacher who is unable to observe the child and their social interactions, as well as the social emotional learning? So can you help us understand, first of all, is it all the objectives from the past? And then how do we deal with the observations that we can't observe, and in particular with social emotional learning?
Yeah, I was noticing some of those comments too. Yes, all of the objectives and dimensions are required. Please keep in mind that not observed is a possibility, but should be used sparingly. Yes, social emotional development will be difficult to observe remotely. This is a great example of one of the objectives to lean into what families know and say, and actually might be of great concern to them if they are unable to interact with neighbors. And there will be, hopefully, plenty of opportunities to engage in peer learning through Zoom and other options that teachers may have. So I believe this is an objective that's actually going to be very important to some families. And I don't believe that we should assume which objectives and dimensions will be important to them. I think we need to offer to families comment on the whole child, because it is a whole child. So we talk a lot about social emotional learning in OSPI and school districts. It's critically important, and the skills associated with it and the developmental progressions, I think parents are very interested in understanding. Again, this is, I think, a place where we just have to accept that conversations with families and evidence that they can help collect is legitimate, especially as we're using it as a place to identify next steps. And we do have to think creatively about helping children continue to develop those skills. So because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. Children really need to continue to practice these skills, and it just creates more opportunity and thought about how to do it. There is one other comment I just think is important to say. Someone asking about if we're holding back development by focusing on the assessment. Because the assessment and the observations occur through activities that children and families are doing, learning should be concurrent with observing. It isn't as though everything is on hold until we know something, right? We're doing these things together. So if anything, by looking at all these areas, we're actually promoting understanding of child development in all areas and attending to them in all areas, and hopefully continuing to build on them beyond the assessment.
Karma, I have a quick question about what you had just mentioned about the prompts and everything like that. So the prompt that you had shown a couple slides back, if I recall, with those questions, could we use that and put it into our assessment based on what the parent has mentioned? I know one was 1A about family meetings. So if they have said, you know, how do they deal with feelings? Can we say, well, based on what parents said, this child does this, would that count as a part of data for this WaKIDS?
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is probably the biggest shift. And I think it's actually the biggest silver lining of all of this, right? It's hard. And I'm not trying to downplay how difficult this is, but I am encouraging everyone to lean into what families know about their children and to give them the tools and invite them to have the conversations and then do something with that information, right? If we're going to collect information about how the child is managing their feelings, which is probably very relevant to families who may be at home with their child experiencing behaviors with their child that are specific to this pandemic we're experiencing, take that information, use that information, write an anecdotal note about it. We are providing some goal forms and other things that we're encouraging families to take an activity, come back, debrief it with the teacher, use that as evidence by all means.
Okay, thank you.
And just to lean into that a little bit more, when Karma was talking, it made me think a lot about the evaluation process when we are identifying a student who's not meeting normal development and we bring in the evaluation process. There is a piece of most evaluations that includes a parent questionnaire. That parent questionnaire is looked at with a teacher questionnaire to look at what the whole picture is of that child. We don't disregard the parent questionnaire. That's an incredibly important piece of an evaluation process. So we just need to be more comfortable and have better tools to be able to use that conversation with parents to get that into the picture that we may see through some sort of video or pictures that parents are sending, and then use it also as that tool that's building the relationship at the same time as giving parents some tools to help them get to that next step.
Yes, Laurie, I want to clap to that. I feel like we're so, especially up in Bellingham in our kindergarten meetings, we're so concerned about if this assessment will be valid. And I've seen it in the chat box. And I just really encourage all of us to not only have these parents trust us, but us trust them. We are going to be able to have an even grander view of what this child is capable of doing and what their needs are based on this partnership. And if we can trust each other, the child is only going to continue to succeed. So that was a really great connection. Thanks for saying that.
I just recently got schooled by someone in assessment division at OSPI that fidelity is using the information. So if you collect information and then you use it, then you are, validity, pardon me. The validity, yes, Brian, he's like, what? That's not true. But validity, if you gather information, you use that information, then that is valid.
And I have this spring, I had a chance to try some of this assessment in partnership with families virtually. And with one family experience, I was seeing some different manages feelings happening at school than what they were seeing at home. And just opening up that first objective into a conversation with them created an hour-long conversation, not saying that it needs to be an hour, don't take that, but just created an hour-long conversation of what was happening at home. And we got to brainstorm together some ideas of how this child could better manage their feelings as they're getting upset playing a game with their sibling. So if anything, having this be virtual, I liked what Karma said, that silver lining. We're actually, in my opinion, going to get to support the development of our children more.
And to that point, we all know this moment in history is tremendously challenging, hard stop for everyone. However, it's in those challenging moments that we have a chance to really define ourselves and demonstrate our values. And we know that a holistic approach to child development is the best way forward. And so this is a chance for us all to really lean into that value, no matter how uncomfortable it is.
This is excellent. I'm going to make a couple of requests here. One, there's some fantastic discussion happening in the chat and lots of great ideas being tossed out there, as well as some questions that we're not going to have time for. So we will capture the chat at the end of this session, and along with the recording and Karma's PowerPoint, we'll see if maybe we can even twist her arm a little bit to help with the little written Q&A for some things that we won't have, because some of the challenges that you have are specific to your district, and some of them are fairly technical, and some of them are we're all dealing with. There's a thread here along the tools and the measurements and the supports for parents, as they are going to have a critical role in this assessment. Is there anything specifically in Teaching Strategies Gold, anything in their tool set that would be, that perhaps we're not using it in a way that would be helpful for parents?
Yes, there are some newly enabled functions that we haven't previously had access to. I apologize, I'm just beginning to get familiar with those myself. We have included some explanation of what those are in the forthcoming guidance that we will be releasing, and we will continue to be sharing some recordings and other things that Teaching Strategies is creating so that teachers understand how to use those tools. The developmental progressions themselves, I think, are valuable for families that may be interested in just having that discussion. Let's look at how this particular skill unfolds. Let's look at the next step for your child. So actually looking at that particular tool. Some of the reporting functions, for instance, the individual child report is a great way to, once you have information collected, putting it into a document that teachers can share with families, and families can begin to, again, understand what the next step is for their child. I think there are a lot of things that ordinarily we have access to as WaKIDS that families would be interested in seeing more, and then we can look forward to some more resources and tools that Teaching Strategies has provided.
I think in that same vein, there are optional functions in the Teaching Strategies platform that we don't require for WaKIDS, being the teach area and the family area. And as Carmen mentioned, the family area has kind of been judged up. There's now a family app where parents can take pictures, videos, notes, and send the teacher, and the teacher can then view and then determine if they want to use that information. Also in the chat, I'll put a link up, but TSG is having a webinar tomorrow and then again next week on how to use these new functionalities. So if you want to take a deeper dive, I'll post that link. And also in the Develop tab on the platform, there is a great wealth of webinars you can kind of explore to become more familiar with that.
Whitney, quick question. Is there something for like families to kind of get quote unquote trained on when we do this WaKIDS? Because some parents might not, obviously they're going to be coming out of here unknowns to what's being occurred to them. But because we were trained for it, will there be something for this parent so that they kind of understand what we are assessing for their child, so that they are kind of aware of the objectives and things that maybe that they can help out with?
Mm-hmm. So I can't speak to what they've built, but I have seen like a user guide for the app and how it works. And I'm sure Carmen and I can touch base with them and find out more for you.
In the teacher guide that I keep referencing, there is a small script that we've suggested some language, how teachers might frame the WaKIDS assessment, why it's being conducted, what the process is, just very short to give families an idea. I would really recommend sort of going slowly. You could potentially show the list of objectives and say, you know, this is part of what we're assessing, or is there an area you want to start with? We're going to take 10 weeks to look at this. Maybe you want to choose as a teacher, have some in mind so that you could make sure to pace it out. the discussion prompts have look-fors, so you could use that as a way to further describe when we talk about managing feelings. Here really is really what we would be looking for to see what that would look like. So I recommend kind of keeping at that level so that families are really just thinking about the particular skill in that moment that might be associated with a recommended activity or something that they are going to do on their own time later, and come back to conversations with teachers and kind of report how it went.
And Karma, I want to add to that. So part of the feedback that I did get from one family in the spring when I was doing the WaKIDS assessment virtually was that some of the jargon and some of the language that we use felt like an additional barrier. And I don't want us to hear that and think as that's another thing to be really concerned about, but instead I encourage you to try to translate for them in ways that make sense to their environment and their culture, which translates back to that building trust and partnership in that very first virtual home connection, to understand what they do daily so that we can go into the assessment, find examples, and kind of change those examples to match what's happening in the home. And that way they will start feeling like they are the experts, which is what we want. We don't want to come in and teacher the parents. We want them to feel like they are the experts and we're just here with the expertise.
A quick question, the discussion prompt and looks for tables, that table that you showed, is that in teacher language or in parent language, or if not, is there a parent-friendly version that could be generated?
It was drawn from a document that we've actually had for a number of years that was designed for families. And so it is, in very general terms, designed for families, but I really think what Jessica says is very important. It is probably only meaningful if families can connect it to what they see and know and do. And so that will be the opportunity to get to know more about the family and child, to really understand how to see that through their eyes, and when they have the opportunity to see those skills and build those skills in their home. So I think there will be some bridging that will be necessary.
Yeah, Karma. And also, I mean, just thinking about where we are in the world today and what's going on, we want to make sure that what we are providing that we think is parent language, well, my lens of what parent language would be based on my experiences is going to be very different. So I would encourage, from what I did this spring, to use that as a tool, but we need to be learning about those families, the language that they use and how they communicate, and what, you know, managing feelings looks like to them, or how they say it in their home, so that they can feel like they're a part of this assessment and, you know, create better partnerships.
Yeah, I think that's so crucially important, and really to that first part of building trust should be, what's the best way to communicate with you? And again, it takes us, we need to go slow, because all the shiny bells and whistles and one more app, that is so overwhelming for some of our families, and we need to focus on what matters most. And sometimes that's not the way I'm most comfortable with receiving my information. So we really have to check our own biases at the door and make sure that through these conversations, we truly think and honor what the family's best way to not just getting information, but giving information is. And that's hard. I mean, this is not the way we are designed or have been taught how to work in the education environment. But I do think that this last spring, our teachers got to know families at a much different level than they ever have. And if we start with what we already knew from last spring and get better at it, we have the potential to make this a stronger relationship and move forward with that, even though there's all sorts of other issues that I don't have the answers to.
I mean, these conversations and partnering could, I mean, revolutionize how we're looking at whole child assessment and observation, and how we're going to continue to teach our students, not in solidation, but in partnership.
Yeah.
Right.
And I would say that's probably, I'm
Sorry, Karma, go ahead.
No, Allie, we want to hear from you. We haven't heard from you yet. I'll pause.
So I think that something that everybody has essentially been saying is that our parents are going to be the most crucial tools to reach our kids this year for however long we're at home. And so we need to find a good way to empower them, kind of like you would with a student that was in their practicum or student teaching. You need to show them that they can do this too. And yes, they might not be a teacher, but they know their kid way better than we will for a while, and maybe ever. But we really need to empower them and give them the confidence that they need to be able to say, oh, I do know what little Johnny does when we do this at home, or when this happens when he's playing with the next door neighbor. So just kind of, we like to take advantage of our resources, and right now those are parents.
That's great. I was going to add that, yes, this is very different than typical practice, and yet this is typical practice for Head Start, for ECAP, for developmental preschool teachers. This idea of conversations with families, checking where children are in their development, partnering together is actually one of the sort of founding ideas behind early learning. And I think for me, sometimes I find that we really haven't necessarily embraced those practices and those philosophies and really brought them into the K-12 system. I noticed some comments in the chat about maybe district administrators possibly not supportive of some of the things we're saying here. And I think that is just maybe an example of some of these practices that are really inherent to the early years, all the way through third grade, actually, that we really need to think about how we do a better job of focusing on child development, centering families. And this is a great opportunity for us to do that.
Great. Well, man, we're at time, and I hate to do it because there's so much passion and wisdom in this room, but we're going to close. And just a quick reflection that I'm having. A very wise woman I worked with, Christy Dominguez, taught me that we are not getting kids ready for school, we're getting schools ready for kids. And so now I'm extrapolating that. We're not getting families ready for school, we're getting our schools ready for the families that we have, especially at this first experience with kindergarten. So thank you, everyone. My last question was going to be, and I think we heard it already, it's like, this is a tough time. What are the silver linings to this? And it seems to have been a thread in the last part of the conversation. So with knowing that we're 2 minutes over, I'm going to leave the last word to any of our experts before we close, but a quick thank you. Brian Gable has done an amazing job in Clover Park pulling this together in this remote panel together, and this particular panel of all-stars, this is great. So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you, Brian Gable, and to all our panelists. And final words, what have you?
I would just like to take this opportunity to say that I am not underestimating how hard this will be. I recognize WaKIDS is a very difficult assessment under ordinary circumstances, and it is often not well supported in districts. Like my example that districts try to do it in the first 3 days. I just want to give to those teachers here to empower you to take your time with this assessment, lean into what families say, try your best, and know that there are options for not observed, but really take this opportunity to try to engage with families in a way that perhaps is new to you, but do it in a way that you find joy and happiness in doing it. Don't treat it as a stressful burden. Treat it as a joyful opportunity to get to know children and families.
I'm going to add to that. Yes, take your time. And thank you for giving us that extension. I think us as all, and some teachers, we really do appreciate it. But also, we all have a plate full, and I know I don't want that to be a burden, but really rely on your team. It is super crucial. I have brand new first year teachers now doing virtual, so I am doing my best to make sure, what can we all do to make sure, hey, how did you do that? What were your tips? We're really working together, and I'm sure all of us do that, but we are really gonna need each other because last year is different. This is a whole brand new ballpark, and we really need to work together, help each other out, figuring out ideas to really make this work. I know it's a lot, believe me, we all know, but I know if we can do it in March, we can do it now. And I know it's a lot, and I really appreciate everybody really pushing it. So thank you guys very much, and thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Yeah. Karma and Lindsay have so perfectly said. I think to add on, remember why we're here, and we're supporting children, and we know this assessment really supports the development. At the end of the day, that's what's most important here.
Yeah, that was actually both things. Go slow, and what's the why? what's your why in doing this, what's the purpose behind it, but slow down and push back when things around you are going fast. I know they're going at the speed of light in our district, but take a breath, slow down yourself, and then push back to get to what that intent and that purpose is.
Laurie, I think that's great. I was going to say to slow down and to remember your why. And then if you need to, ask for help. I think that's something that we're really bad at in general as educators, is that we don't ask for help when we need it. And I think that now is the perfect time to start if you haven't already.
Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you all. I just want to end with be kind to yourself, and I hope you have a wonderful year.